Alas, the end is nigh. Well, at least for Edgar Wright's acclaimed trilogy of cult British films. The series began its humble beginnings with the Channel 4 sitcom Spaced, which ran for 2 series. It was about two friends who posed as a couple in order to reach the conditions of renting a flat. It was a great sitcom which brought together a lot of people who would go on to make this trilogy, the first feature film of which is Shaun of the Dead, an obvious reference to the brilliant Dawn of the Dead. You would imagine with a title like that it would be a parody of zombie films, when in fact it is a great zombie flick which just so happens to be a comedy as well. Also, a romance. That's what's great about these films, how they mishmash a lot of different genres. That film is about a slacker called Shaun who has to pull his life together, while also trying to protect the people he loves from the impending doom of a zombie apocalypse. The next film was Hot Fuzz, which is about a big city cop called Nicholas Angel being forced to move into a small village which has very little homicide rate, but has a very high accident rate. What's interesting here is how Simon Pegg plays kind of the reverse of the character in Shaun of the Dead, as in that he was a slacker who grows and takes responsibility, whereas here he plays a responsible, hard-working guy who needs to loosen up a bit. And that takes us to the conclusion, The World's End. Now before I talk about it, you may be wondering why it's a trilogy, as they sound completely different from each other. Well, the films are not directly connected, but they are very much spiritually linked to each other in a number of different ways. The most obvious are that they're genre movies, they share a similar cast, they have the same director, and they're all comedies. But they also share running jokes, feature pubs as main settings, and share some themes such as unlikely heroes, friendship, conforming to something bigger than yourself, and nostalgia, which is particularly a strong theme in this film. The film revolves around Simon Pegg's character, Gary King, a cocky alcoholic who sees his teenager years as his glory days. He reminisces fondly of one night in particular, where he and 4 mates embark on a pub crawl called the Golden Mile, which is 12 pints, 12 pubs, ending at one called The World's End. Many years down the road, a kink appears in his so-called perfect night, when he realises that they never actually completed the Golden Mile. This eats away at him and he feels he needs to set this right. So he tracks down his friends, who he had long since lost contact with, and convinces them to go back to their old town and tackle the Golden Mile again. And this time, they're going to reach the World's End. His friends have grown up a lot, and have their own successes and lives, but reluctantly join King because of his manipulative nature. Quite an interesting dynamic, I think. A bunch of people have grown up normally, pursued the usual things, while one person lives solely in the past where he feels most happiest. His friends are Peter, played by Eddie Marsan, who has grown up to be a car salesman. He had quite a negative childhood because of a bully. Then there's Oliver, played by Martin Freeman, who was the butt of a lot of jokes because he had a birthmark on his face that looks like a 6. So they gave him the nickname the O-Man. Then there's Stephen, played by Paddy Considine, who has a bit of a friendly rivalry with Gary. And finally Andrew, who's played by Nick Frost. Now Nick Frost normally plays the comic relief and sidekick of Pegg's characters, the dim and likeable one. But here he is probably the most sensible of the characters, and is probably the toughest one for Gary to convince. When they arrive in town, it is a huge shock to Gary that he is not recognised, and that he is not the legend that he has fooled himself to believe. They soon discover that aliens or robots have taken the places of people in the town, kind of like the film Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And that is kind of the main idea of the film. I won't go into any details, but each characters have their own progression throughout this film. The film is mainly about nostalgia and how it can sometimes go too far, and also about globalization and how that can also go too far. This film is very much in the style of others, It is fast-paced, lots of witty dialogue. There are lots of little Easter eggs, treats, and little subtle details that fans of these movies are used to, and I'm sure need multiple viewings to catch them all. I noticed some foreshadowing, like, as they're about to enter the town, Gary says, "Take a look, boys, because next time you see it, we will have painted it red." And each of the pubs are very carefully named and have some sort of significance to the plot at that point. I absolutely love the use of music throughout this film. There's a lot of older tracks in there to fit in with the fact that Gary is still living through his past. I particularly like the use of the Doors' Alabama song, as it complements the sense that they're feeling out of place at that moment. Some of the jokes may fall a little flat here and there, but it moves at such a pace that there's always a good one coming. There's lots of callbacks to certain jokes early on. I think this is a very fitting end to the series, and in fact it may actually be my favourite of the three. So the short of it is, if you're a fan of Shaun of the Dead or Hot Fuzz, or in fact Space, I doubt you'll be disappointed by this film. Anyway, thanks for listening.